She had her car packed, her resignation letter written, and a plan to disappear from her own life by morning. But somewhere on a dark highway outside Phoenix, a voice she hadn't heard in 15 years stopped her cold, and everything she thought she knew about walking away from God changed in an instant. Her name was Jennifer Cole, though most people who knew her simply called her Jen. She was 38 years old, a marketing director at a mid-sized firm in Phoenix, Arizona, successful by every measure the world uses to define success. A nice house. A good job. A life that looked, from the outside, like it had everything together. But Jen hadn't set foot inside a church in 15 years, not since she was 23, not since a devastating breakup, a painful falling out with her childhood church over how a personal crisis had been handled by leadership she trusted, and a slow, quiet drift away from a faith that had once been the center of her entire identity. She grew up the daughter of missionaries, raised on scripture memorization and mission trips, the kind of upbringing that made walking away from it feel, to everyone who knew her back then, almost unthinkable. But Jen had walked away anyway, and for 15 years, she built a life that had no room left in it for the God she used to know so intimately. She told herself she was simply too busy, too focused on her career, too disillusioned by the hurt she had experienced within the church to ever go back. She didn't call herself an atheist exactly. She just called herself done. By 38, though, something inside Jen had started quietly unraveling. Her career, the thing she had built her entire identity around, had begun to feel hollow in a way she couldn't quite explain to anyone, least of all herself. A long relationship had recently ended, badly, leaving her more isolated than she wanted to admit. Her closest friendships had thinned out over the years, sacrificed on the altar of career ambition she was no longer sure had been worth it. She found herself lying awake most nights, staring at the ceiling of a beautiful house that somehow felt achingly empty, wondering how she had ended up so successful and so profoundly alone at the same time. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in March. Jen had just come from a company meeting where a promotion she had worked toward for 3 years was handed to a colleague instead, a moment that, on its own, might not have meant much. But that night, sitting alone in her too quiet house, something in Jen simply broke. Years of exhaustion, loneliness, and a hollow ache she had been outrunning for over a decade finally caught up with her all at once. She made an impulsive decision that night. She was going to leave. Pack a bag, get in her car, and drive somewhere, anywhere, away from a life that had stopped meaning anything to her, away from a city full of people who barely knew the real her, away from everything familiar. She wrote a brief resignation email to her boss, set to send automatically in the morning. She packed a bag. And a little after 11 that night, she got in her car and started driving west out of Phoenix, with no real destination in mind, just a desperate need to be anywhere other than where she was. She drove for almost 2 hours in silence, the desert highway stretching dark and empty in front of her headlights, her mind spinning through 15 years of choices that had somehow led her to this exact, hollow moment. And then, somewhere on that dark stretch of highway, Jen heard something that made her grip the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. It wasn't an audible voice, not the way she would later struggle to explain it to people who asked. It was something deeper than that, something she felt more than heard, but it was as clear and unmistakable to her in that moment as any voice she had ever heard out loud. A single sentence, spoken directly into the center of her exhausted, breaking heart. Jennifer, I never left you. You left me. But I am still right here. Jen says she pulled her car over onto the shoulder of that highway so abruptly she nearly lost control, her hands shaking, tears immediately streaming down her face before she even understood why. She sat there in the dark, engine still running, hazard lights blinking against the empty desert around her, and for the first time in 15 years, Jen spoke directly to God, out loud, alone in that car. I don't even know if you're really there, she said through tears. I don't know if I believe in any of this anymore. But if that was you, if you just said that to me, I need you to show me. I don't know how to find my way back. I don't even know if I want to. But I don't know how to keep living like this either. She sat on that shoulder for almost 45 minutes, crying in a way she hadn't allowed herself to cry in years, 15 years of buried grief and disappointment and quiet, aching loneliness finally breaking loose all at once on an empty highway in the middle of the night. Jen didn't drive west that night. She turned her car around and drove back home, though she says she barely remembers the drive, moving on some kind of autopilot fueled by exhaustion and the strange, unshakable feeling that something significant had just happened to her, even if she couldn't fully explain what. The following morning, still shaken by the night before, Jen did something she hadn't done in 15 years. She searched for a local church online, scrolling through several options before stopping, almost inexplicably, on a small congregation called Desert Springs Fellowship, a modest church about 15 minutes from her house that she had somehow never noticed before, despite driving past that intersection nearly every day for years. She sat in her car in the parking lot that Sunday morning for almost 20 minutes before finally working up the courage to walk inside, certain she would feel like an outsider, certain the years away would show on her somehow, certain everyone would sense immediately that she didn't belong there anymore. Instead, she was greeted at the door by a woman named Carol Jennings, an older greeter with warm eyes and an easy smile, who simply said, "Good morning, honey. I don't think I've seen you here before. We're so glad you came." Jen sat in the back row that morning, unsure what to expect, uncertain how she would feel hearing worship music again after so many years away. But when the congregation began to sing, something inside Jen, some part of her she thought had gone permanently silent, began quietly, tearfully coming back to life. The pastor that morning, a warm, unassuming man named Pastor Elijah Marsh, preached a sermon that felt, to Jen, unnervingly specific to exactly what she had experienced on that highway less than 24 hours earlier. He spoke about the story of the prodigal, about a father who never stops watching the horizon for his children to come home, about grace that doesn't require you to have everything figured out before you're welcomed back. Jen cried through nearly the entire service, quietly, in the back row, overwhelmed by a feeling of homecoming she hadn't expected and could barely put into words. Jen didn't experience some instant, complete transformation that Sunday. Healing rarely works that cleanly, and she's honest about that when she tells her story now. There were still hard weeks that followed, moments of doubt, old wounds from her earlier church experience that needed real time and real conversations to work through. Carol Jennings became an unexpected mentor during those months, patiently walking alongside Jen as she slowly, carefully rebuilt a faith that 15 years of hurt and distance had fractured. But Jen kept showing up. Week after week, slowly reconnecting with a relationship she had once been so certain she had walked away from for good. She started praying again, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence, remembering, gradually, the voice that had once felt so central to her entire life. About 8 months after that night on the highway, Jen shared her story publicly for the first time, standing in front of the congregation at Desert Springs Fellowship during a Sunday service, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "I spent 15 years convinced I had moved past needing God in my life," she told them. "I built a whole identity around not needing Him. But sitting alone on the side of a dark highway, more lost than I had ever felt in my entire life, He didn't wait for me to come looking for Him. He came looking for me first. I didn't deserve that. I hadn't earned that. But that's exactly what grace is, isn't it? It shows up exactly when you least expect it, and exactly when you need it most." Jen still attends Desert Springs Fellowship today, several years later. She's become a mentor herself now to other women navigating their own seasons of doubt and distance from faith, often sharing her story with a simple honesty that resonates with people carrying similar wounds. She still drives that same stretch of highway sometimes, and she says she always slows down a little when she passes that particular shoulder of road, remembering the night everything changed. The night a voice she thought she'd never hear again reminded her that 15 years of distance had never once changed how deeply she was loved. "I used to think I had to have my whole life figured out before I could go back to God," Jen says now. "I learned that night that He wasn't waiting for me to have anything figured out. He was just waiting for me to turn the car around." If you feel far from God tonight, if years of distance or hurt or exhaustion have convinced you that going back isn't possible anymore, please hear Jen's story and let it speak to whatever you're carrying. You are not too far gone. You are not too late. You have not wandered further than grace can reach. Whatever highway you're driving down right now, whatever direction you think your life is headed, know this. He is not waiting for you to arrive with everything sorted out. He is simply waiting for you to turn the car around.